venu à la conférence avec Michel Dartmouth dans mois février dans New Hampshire. C'est ouais, ça c'est génial. No, you're not here. No, you're not here this time. Sandy? Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's great to see all these conversations continuing. My name is Laurent Dubois. I'm one of the co-directors of the Haiti Lab, and we're really excited to greet you to the second day of the conference. Many of us are continuing from yesterday. Some are new faces. I just want to say a few quick words setting up today. We had a great set of discussions yesterday, and if you missed them, you can go on YouTube and watch them. I thought what was particularly interesting was that when we went from a panel in the morning where there was a fair amount of unanimity, which is that things are not working well and have not worked well, and I think really good perspectives and critique on how that and why it was happening. And then in the second panel, of course, a more in some ways more tense and kind of difficult exchange around why exactly, what's gone wrong. And a really interesting, I think, distinction between different perspectives on that, some that emphasized historical structural context and others reminding us of the kind of urgencies of the present. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about how we can bring those perspectives together. So today, in some ways, this panel now bears the burden of answering the question that I think everyone agrees it has to be answered. What is to be done, right? What are we to do facing both this long historical complexity and these kind of very immediate pressing questions? So we're really excited to have them here. I'm going to let the panel come to introduce them. I do want to remind everyone that this is being live streamed, so it's on the media. People are watching from outside. People will be tweeting in questions. It was being live streamed. It's interesting because each day we have some sort of haunting in this conference. Like yesterday was screen, so there's somebody watching from out there that wants us to be aware. So just know that when you're talking, that's going on. In addition, yesterday we did have a panel that was mostly in Creole in the afternoon with translation. This will mostly be in English. However, we invite anybody who wishes to intervene in Creole to do so. As this is kind of a bilingual event, and we think it's important to have Creole as part of the language of the discussion. So with that, I will turn over. Oh, I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? I just want to emphasize how important the student involvement has been in all this. And really, in fact, as you saw yesterday, Laura Wagner, who's a UNC graduate student, Claire Payton, who's one of the masterminds behind the whole thing, and then our undergraduate students from North Carolina Central University and Duke really are behind so much of what's going on here, and that's part of what makes this, for us, so exciting. Because they're the ones who hopefully will take these discussions into the future as well. So I do want to acknowledge that again. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome you to.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, you do.
I was just going to project, but okay, so I just wanted to welcome everyone to the second day of Humanitarianism in Haiti, the Visions of Practice Conference. My name is Katia Griffin-Jacknet, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating the panel this morning, which will focus on capacity building. Of course, as Laurent mentioned, the entire panel can be followed on live stream, and you can tweet questions to #HaitiProject at any point during the discussion. And for everyone that's able to join us here, please hold your questions until the Q&A, because we should have plenty of time to get to all of your questions. So joining me on the panel this morning, starting from the left, is Father Joseph Philippe, who is the founder of Foncosé, which is Haiti's largest microfinance institution, as well as University of Fondois. Tatiana, who is the director of the Haiti Research and Policy Program at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Conor Bohan, who is the founder and executive director of the Haitian Education and Leadership Project, known as HELP, and Marie Saint-Cyr, CEO of the Lambie Fund of Haiti, which is one of the key organizations that's supporting sustainable development at the grassroots level in Haiti. As a way of introduction, as I mentioned, this panel will be talking about capacity building, which as a practice or a development model seeks in part to reduce dependency on outside aid and actors and to strengthen local institutions, communities, and individuals so they can achieve self-reliance and sustainable progress. But at the same time, the term is deployed very widely by groups from very small groups to the World Bank and many different types of initiatives. So its meaning might actually be somewhat contested, even as everyone promotes the idea and everyone believes that it's something that obviously needs to be done to build the capacity of Haitians. So hopefully in this panel we'll be able to interrogate some of the issues that are central to these goals, like strengthening the skills and competencies of people and communities in Haiti, prioritizing Haitian agency and sovereignty, and ultimately a Haitian-led reconstruction and a Haitian-led Haiti. The first question I have is for everyone, and I'm really excited about the panelists today. They all come from slightly different backgrounds, so I'd like to hear from everyone. So if you could keep your answers to about 5 minutes so we have enough time to get to all the other questions, that would be great. First question is, how do you understand capacity building in your own work? And what challenges or goals does that element of your work seek to address? Anyone's welcome to respond.
Thank you. I am Father Joseph Philippe with the Holy Ghost Congregation. The first organization I have founded in Haiti is APF, the Association of the Peasants of Fondois, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And I want to express my gratitude to Michel Pierre-Louis Focal, who has given a lot of support to us, and we have also Cathy Walmer through Family Health Ministries, who has helped us a lot. And the second organization I have funded was Fonds, the largest microfinance institution in Haiti, which has about 200,000 savers, 75,000 borrowers, 1,000 employees, and 46 branches all over the country. And the third is the Congregation of the Sisters of Saint Anthony of Fondois, which is a religious order for women in the Roman Catholic Church. And the last one is the University of Fondois. And going back to your question, how do we experience capacity building? I want to share with you two stories, and you will learn how we do that. In Fondois, we have an orphanage. We have children from all over, about 58 children in this orphanage. We have a school from kindergarten, elementary, and high school, and we have a university. I want to share with you the story of Martha, a little girl who came to our orphanage when she was 4. She went to our kindergarten school, elementary, high school, and after high school, she joined, when we opened the university in 2004, she joined the business school. And in 2009, she graduated in business management, and she's working as a business manager at the University of Fondois now. And the second story is from Lulu, another boy. He came when he was 5. He did the same journey as Martha. And after high school graduation, he went to Cuba to study agronomy. He was back in 2011, and he's a teacher in agronomy at the University of Fondois now. And for us, human resources is one of the most needed areas in Haiti. Now, capacity building, you know, it's one of the things we need to strengthen. As I think Camille Chalmers said yesterday, 84% of Haitian graduates are outside of Haiti. And you know, most of the resources of Haiti is outside of the country. That's why I think we need to provide to each one of the 570 rural communities in Haiti a team of 3 specialists working in a permanent basis with the local grassroots organizations, so that we can give economic power to the local grassroots organizations in Haiti in order to organize sustainable economic development. I stop there. Thank you.
Well, I understand capacity building from the world of development practice. Largely speaking, and I am going to take my full 5 minutes, if we understand $10 billion yearly is giving the world over to low-income countries for capacity building within the larger governance programs. In addition to that, outside of governance programs, all other sectors have between 10 and 20% of their programs that's supposed to be dedicated to capacity building. Now, as of yesterday, you'll understand that that percentage, nobody knows where the money goes. And there are 3 to 4 components to capacity building that donors look at. Technical assistance, which is sending somebody who makes $200,000 for 2 weeks, and you create a report, and it's really nice. No one understands the report, and it goes off. The second component is equipment and materials. So they really don't like to pay public servants, so they'll provide equipment or materials. So they'll give you a computer. Of course, there's no energy to run the computer, but you'll have a computer, you'll have a nice desk, and materials. The third component is training and education. Now, what happens with training and education is that you understand, since it's the rubric is within a governance program, it has to span all fields and all sectors. And it has to span all roles and functions. So think through what good governance, and this is OECD good governance principles that all of our donors abide by, which ranges from management to program and policy design, to procurement, to regulatory frameworks, to creating organizational standards, to monitoring and evaluation, to service delivery itself. So think from the line ministries, from your very top, starting with your ministers, down the entire civil servant chain, then going down to the service delivery itself, the person who's going to do the immunization, for example, your community health worker, or your teacher. So training encompassing your entire national framework, right? Your entire civil society, which now I include public sector, because it comes from those who are actually designing the programs to those who are actually delivering it. Now, that kind of training could only really be gotten if you had a real educational system. Because what usually happens, if you come to do rule of law, for example, you have to train judges, you have to train, if you just take that sector, for example, just the legal sector, the judiciary sector, from judges to legal staff, to paralegal formation, the entire chain, to the police, because it has to be attached to the police, the entire chain of the legal system, if you think of it, and you're only allowed 2 or 3 or 4 weeks training, and you go off. And the training usually is done in another language, because most of it is done in English. And you have a translator, right? And it's a 2-3 week program. You're leaving the country bereft. And in fragile states, particularly in a country like Haiti, where the top of the line training, you put in a first contingent comes to train, and then another government comes. That contingent that you just trained is no longer in the government. You lose it to the NGO. Anyway, so you're always leaving one sector or one segment of the country bereft of capacity building. One thing donors never do, which my friend Conor will talk more, is dealing with the institution that would be most likely to have historical memory, which is the university system. Donors never touch the university system. And for any country to really have the continuous level of formation of leaders, whether it's the teacher, whether it's the lawyer, whether it's the judge, it's got to come from a university system, because education is fundamentally also cultural, not just technical, and it's contextual. So if you're going to formulate whether you're going to formulate policy design, program design, plan design, system design, it has to relate to a training and education that relates to your culture. Right? And so the capacity and the way in which it's designed, it's always, even if you're using the language that it's spoken, Creole or French, you lose it because the language itself does not relate to the needs and the context of the place. And technical assistance, usually by the time that the big suits arrive, just to understand the context, it's about time for them to leave and their monies are done. And so I'm arguing for, there's several capacity building papers that are just not out, that's showing that Haiti to arrive to, it'll take Haiti 400 years to get at the level of capacity building in just governance of Singapore. Just to substitute the brain drain that's happening, and only on the diaspora side, we're not even talking about the brain drain that's happening currently with the NGOs. It'll take 125 years to replace what it had lost between 1970 and 1990. So we're talking about a country bereft of capacity across the sectors. And let's not even mention the private sector. As much as we want to say private sector, Haiti's open for business. Let's go right ahead and put our money there because the public sector was so bad, worked so badly. You go try to put the money in your private sector. It's just as unequipped in terms of capacity as the public sector. We forget fundamentally the basis of education is just not there, and the type of education that's given, whether it's training or fundamentally education, the thinking process, the analysis, the analytical process just does not exist. Where the current educational system also is failing the Haitians, so I have to give the donor in, and also the current educational framework in Haiti, which is really sort of a rude type of education system where the students are not taught to think, they're not taught to analyze. So you're getting a lot of folks who may, and that's a huge question mark, may write a really nice French letter, beautiful poetry, but you ask for analytical paper, you're going to fail. And those are the folks that are about to make decisions on what to do or even counteract the donor. I often, through, I've gone through now 4 governments in 3 years. And I often, sit at a table where officials have to face donors in negotiation for X, Y, and Z in some sector. And you're given a huge list or pre-contract really, or to say, this is what I'm offering you. And the capability to analyze what's in front of you, it's zero. So I see folks signing Haiti's life away because of the incapacity to actually articulate and understand what's in front of them across the board, whether it's education sector or health sector, or the worst is infrastructure, right? Because we're talking about huge contracts, whether it's for roads or for, forget it, mining and energy, or the worst, because we just don't have the language because and the capacity to do that. I want to stop there because I think I took my 5 minutes, and then we'll follow up with questions.
Just another note, if everyone could speak into the mics as much as possible, I think that would improve the live stream quality.
There's a constraint.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
All right, I'll
Leave it on the stand.
okay.
It'll
we go.
This is going to pick me
It's
up.
good to be
Okay,
short.
here we go. Well, first of all, I want to thank Laurent for his most recent technical assistance with the microphone, but also Laurent and Deborah for and Josh and Claire and all the students for having us here and for putting this on and for showing everybody such a good time and for being able to attract such high-level panelists, with the exception of myself. It's great. Thank you. When we talk about capacity building, I think capacity building is bureaucraties, and I think fundamentally for me, capacity building is education. It's teaching somebody something that they didn't know before, and that's education. It's giving them skills or knowledge that they did not previously have. That's education in my book. When we talk about the education sector in Haiti, it's really important to understand the alarming context that we're dealing with. The primary school enrollment rate in Haiti today is about 60%. So 60% of the kids who should be in primary school are in primary school. 40% of the kids who should be in primary school are not. When you go up to the secondary level, the enrollment rate throughout over the entire secondary sector from say grades 9 through 13 is 20%. 80% of the kids who should be in secondary school are not. When you go to the university, the high school graduation rate, now that is of all not among the people who start high school, but among the age eligible group is 5%. 5% of Haitian children are graduating from high school. Less than 1% is able to enroll in university. It's 0.7%. That's the university enrollment rate in Haiti, 0.7%. Of those that enroll, less than half graduate. The maximum number of university graduates that we can have as a percentage of the overall population is 0.3%. Combine this with this brain drain that's taken place over the past 50 years, the highest rate of brain drain in the world of countries of 5 million people or more, it's 84%. 84% of Haitians with a university degree live outside of Haiti. So what I tell people is take the place where you work or take the place where you go to school and think about what would happen if you told 84% of the people with a university degree not to show up on Monday morning, and you replace them with people who, most of whom didn't have a high school degree, many of whom didn't have hadn't graduated from primary school. How long would your institution last? Most institutions wouldn't last till lunchtime. Now imagine trying to run a country under those circumstances. So that's what we're dealing with. So the basic and fundamental problem and that you're going to run into whatever you want to do in Haiti, be it health or infrastructure or democracy building, whatever it is, you're going to run into that problem. You don't have any qualified people. And the only way to get them is to send them to school in Haiti. So I mean, this is kind of alarming. Haiti has a country with a lot of problems. We've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of the problems, and I think it's and there's a sense oftentimes you just throw up your hands and say, you know, what can we do? Well, I think it's fortuitous that we're in the John Hope Franklin Center today. Because the first time, I didn't even know who John Hope Franklin was until a couple of years ago. And the first time I ever heard of him was an interview that he gave at the occasion of the inauguration of Barack Obama. And Franklin was born in Oklahoma in 1915. And he said in the interview that so he grew up in the segregated South in the 20s and 30s. And he said that when he was growing up, he was a little boy, and he'd be walking around with his mom, and he'd meet people on the street, mostly white people, and they'd ask him what he wanted to be when he grew up. And one time his mother said to him, he said, you know, next time someone asks you that question, tell them you want to be president. And he said, so that was the stock answer that they gave, I want to be president. And he did this just to cause trouble, because the whole notion that a little black boy from Oklahoma could be president was absurd. It was totally absurd. Now, from saying something just to be absurd to making it a reality, it took a long time. Franklin died actually just a couple weeks after I heard that interview. He died in March of 2009, just about 10 weeks after the inauguration of the first black president. And so, what Michel Pierre-Louis says very often is that when we talk about Haiti, we need to envision a future that fulfills the promise of Haiti's past. And so we have to think about the absurd, and we have to make the absurd come to pass, because it can, because John Hope Franklin saw it happen. It takes a long time, takes a lot of work, but there is no progress whatsoever in Haiti until everybody who should be in school is in school. I would say there's also there's a constitutional mandate for universal free education, public education, that has never ever been remotely fulfilled by the government. This goes back to the Constitution of 1987. I would also say very quickly that when you cite these figures, this doesn't happen by accident. The enrollment rates as percentage of kids enrolled in school and numbers of kids enrolled in school is far higher than it ever has been in Haiti's history. In the 1970s, under the Duvalier dictatorship, the school enrollment rate, primary school enrollment rate in the rural areas was 10%. So Laurent talked yesterday about Christophe and the series of schools that he set up around the country, and the person, Boyer, who came after Christophe, actually closed down all the schools that Christophe had started. And what was interesting is that, it's ironic, Christophe was Christophe came to Haiti at the age of 12, I believe. He wasn't an educated guy. He happened to be a visionary. And the people who, and at the same time Christophe was in the north opening schools and educating tens of thousands of people, Pétion, who had actually gone to the military academy in France, built one school, a single school, and in Port-au-Prince, and Boyer, who was his classmate at the military academy in France. So the two people who had higher education, had access to higher education, actually closed down more schools than they built, and the one guy who didn't have higher education built schools for tens of thousands. It started a mass education system. So this is not by accident that we get here. This is a very concerted policy over 100 years to deny people education. And when we talk about capacity building in Haiti, the very first thing we need to do is we need to think big. We need to fulfill the constitutional obligation, and we need to start getting kids in school.
I get a little bit of palpitation listening to Tatiana and to you. Because when I go to rural Haiti, I have to assume a number of things. First, that Port-au-Prince is not Haiti, that the rural area is really the main trust of this country. I also have to assume that the portrayal of Haiti, if I ask you today in the audience, find me 5 words that describe the Haiti that you know if you haven't been there, what would they be? What would they be? Just any one.
Dignity and sovereignty.
Dignity and sovereignty. Lacking and failing in dignity and sovereignty, because we as a people have a sense that we are sovereign. But right now we're occupied. Let's put that in perspective. If we look at the brain drain in Haiti, I have to be in agreement that we're functioning much better outside of the country than we are within. But if I go to the rural area, I have to assume myself, having gone outside of my country, educated in American universities, that there is a collective knowledge that makes Haiti function within family constructs and within groups and within communities. the Lumbi Fund works in organization that are rural areas that are for lack of infrastructure and support. They have created organizations that are functioning and that are functioning fairly well in view of the context that's been created. And so I want to give you an example. I want to take APS, which is an organization in Bohan, and AGSDC, which is an organization in Dori, and talk a little bit about them. They are both mills that we have supported. Those organizations are older than the Lumbi Fund, which is 18 years old. And what happened within this organization is that when we were building capacity, we trained mechanics to manage the mills and to work with the mills. The organization actually invests resources by creating the location. We assist in purchasing the mills, providing internal management assessment, management support in terms of training. The window of time is important because we work with the organization for 24 months at a minimum. We realize the context is difficult to manage, and so that building a contractual agreement is also having to do with looking at what their capacity, they're assessing their own capacities, and they're defining their needs, and they're defining some solutions. And we work in concert with that. But as APS build a mill within less than 6 years. Not only they build a mill, they added to the mill in terms of milling millet, corn, and rice. They also get a truck that picks up the women who carried the cereals to be transformed. And so when at first our experience, what we saw was that girls were taken out of school in order to help the mother carry. When the organization decided to get a school, those girls, they were able to stay in school. When we get a cistern, they were able to continue to stay in school. So one of the things I'm agreeing, if you don't build infrastructure, you cannot build the appropriate capacity. So many times we focus on capacity building, we really are in a difficult context. However, it gets done. So that's one of the things that happen. So we see girls going to school and staying in school, because if you take a farmer in Haiti, despite the difficulties, they are really splitting the harvest in 3 parts. One is for their living every day, one is for education of the kids, another part is the seeds to replant for the next harvest. And so you see that there is a awareness, there is a strategy, and there is also a capacity. When we come in, when we want to define that capacity, we have to learn from the current environment. We don't come in having the assumption that we're gonna bring the skills in. There is a level of skills. We're gonna help build it up. We're gonna promote democratic practice in terms of elections, and we're not going to create or help create organizations that are personalized to the point of deification, which is what we see in Port-au-Prince. We create organization, we manage the organization for the rest of our lives. We don't build monitoring and mentoring that would assist in la relève, succession. We see that tremendously, but I think in the organization, at least for the 140 or 150 organizations we work with, we've seen that evolution. What happened with AGSDC? AGSDC is coming along. It's an organization that we have assisted as the Lumbi Fund in the last 3 years, but they are 27 years old. By the time AGSDC initiated its mills, what happened? We did not have to import training of the mechanics. What happened is that APS now is able to train the mechanics for AGSDC. AGSDC also were able to go there to pilot, to see how it is managed, to have a hands-on number of weeks in the Bohan area. And so we're seeing the transfer of skill that we put in the community. This is one step at a time. But what I can join you in agreeing is that unless there is a plan that looks at the priority of needs among Haitians, that really put a priority on the rural, the 90% of the people of Haiti, and start creating strategies to support them, support them in their agriculture, then we're not going to be able to build capacity, as Tatiana just explained. However, if we go to the rural area where we have organizations that have taken charge for lack of infrastructure, take charge in their respective areas, working with local communities, working with farmer members, then we will see change. It must be planned. It must be within the context of a state that has assumed the responsibility for its people. That is not what we have. In looking at the post-earthquake area, we're looking at Haiti portrayed the poorest, the most resilient, has a history, cannot really connect with the ancestral history. And then we have a situation where a new elite has been created by donors in Haiti, the elite of the NGOs, who live at another level, who gets paid at another level, who manage at another level. And the portrayal of Haiti is such that it is assuming, and many, maybe not true, but many are assuming there is no capacity. So we're importing capacity. I believe that we have to step back and start building capacity from what we have. It's just like taking the rice in Lautibonite. Odevea is being pretty depleted. But we have irrigation system, first, secondary, and tertiary. And if you look at the tertiary canals, they're not working because they're not being maintained. So we're reducing our capacity. If we simply decide as a government, and I'm talking as a Haitian, if we as a government decide rice is important for us, so Clinton don't have to apologize to us for the strategy. If we simply assume that and we maintain the current system, then hopefully we can maintain that capacity and build more. And so I want to say the portrayal and the expectation from that portrayal really damages building capacity in Haiti. As you said, technical assistance in fixing the meter and giving a computer is not capacity building. We don't have alternative energies. And so the need to create alternative energy so that we can build certain capacities in Haiti is important. But without a plan for us to acknowledge that an alternative energy will help in reforestation, will help in many, many ways for us to maintain our land, and put some really gate to support this land, this is not happening. We have responsibility as Haitians. So if I can borrow a coin phrase, we the people, we the Haitian people must assume responsibility for our future. In many ways, there are incremental steps. In the Land Before, one of the responsibilities that we assume is to, no matter, this is the non-negotiable factor of our contract with our folks. No matter what project we do, whether it's microcredit to farmers, whether it's ox plow, whether it's supporting women in their bulk, in their small enterprise, we must plant 25,000 trees per project. And it can be, we would provide the agroforestry training, we would provide the animal husbandry training, the other negotiable. If we are doing goats, élevage, husbandry, if we are raising any kind of animals, they must be within a pasture, we must create food for them. The food has to be planted in areas because when we plant the grass for the goats, or we plant the food, we're maintaining the soil, and the goats are not running free. If we could work with our governments to create a policy that limits free grazing and support pâturage, pasture, then we would work toward improving the quality of the soil. So we have to also begin to create an atmosphere or a place of dialogue or a space of dialogue where Haitians not only understand there is constitutional law and there are rights, there are human rights framework that our governments have supported, that we need to know so that we can demand the rights for all our people. We need to advocate not only at the level of Congress in the US, understanding that USAID has a very strong effort and hand in Haiti, in managing Haiti, that we need to create organizations like HALT, but we need to advocate for our people in the parliamentary structures in our own country to ask for the rights of those who have been called resilient, but who are people who need support in order to improve the quality of their lives.
I think they need a round of applause.
Thank you to everyone. I can see that everyone has such a rich take on the role of education in capacity building, and not to mention a strong background in education. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. Do you see the most important or urgent role of education to be technical, to support infrastructure, or maybe to have a political education or democratic education that instills certain values in the people that you're working with and trying to empower? So if you could speak to the balance between technical education and whether that is more of a priority or something more democratic or something more of a social education.
If I may first, I'll say that I will not speak to the balance, but I really believe that it is a parallel track. I think within the culture of Haiti, we have a deep sense of freedom, sharing in our common values, working together in many ways. I think that we have to look at educating account the laws that are, that are supposedly the base foundation. And so establishing a system of justice that works in Haiti is a critical part of education. So I think that we have brain drain, but we also have a lot of people in the diaspora who really wants to bring some input to give back to the country. And I think we need to organize to bring some of that experience in education back to support the framework that has to evolve in order for our people to build the capacity. I think it's parallel track. There is need for informal wisdom and knowledge of localities in the country. And you certainly have heard the statistical numbers to support primary, secondary, and university education. I think most important, we need to decentralize where education is located to facilitate. Just imagine, with the challenge of not having enough jobs in Haiti, how a parent in Chantal is going to send the children to university in Port-au-Prince or to Cap Haitian or to other places or even outside of the country. It's an important aspect for us to look at that currently there probably are more Haitians in the Republic Dominican in the university education than in many places. They need to be in Haiti, and we need to decentralize and have universities across the country with clear priorities on what our skill sets needs are, and one of them is agriculture.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to address that from two perspectives. I want to identify with you some of my heroes. You have John F. Kennedy, who said, "Don't ask your country what your country can do for you. Ask yourself what you can do for your country." And another of my main heroes is Caporal Mort. When l'élite dit cheval libre en boulette, il dit en avant, n'a continuer. We're moving forward. I think we need to.
Father Joseph, do you want to? That's a great story. Do you want to tell that story in English for the people who are here?
You are my translator.
No. Go ahead. No, it's perfect. Go ahead. No, because this is a good story that people need to hear.
If somebody wants to translate, I can say it in Creole myself, but not in English. If somebody wants to translate it,
Tatiana will translate.
Would you?
Why are you doing that to me? Okay. Vas-y.
Ok. Non, moi, je te dis que j'ai deux modèles. C'est John F. Kennedy Lady.
Mwen kwa yo kompren sa.
Ah, ok, c'est Kapolamo. Kapolamo, un fondateur pays d'Haïti.
The other hero is the founder of the country,
Kapolamo.
Capo Lamo.
Les chevals li prend boulette pendant les dans la guerre.
His horse was hit by a bullet,
And
During the
et
war.
puis il dit en avant.
and he says, just go forward.
He never stopped. And we have also Henri Christophe.
Henri Christophe.
Yeah, and when he said, even my city is reduced in ashes, on the same ashes, I will rebuild it. You know, that means for me, the two main things is to learn how to give back and to teach others to do the same thing. From a poor family from rural Haiti, the people who are living in the countryside represent more than 70% of the Haitian population. And for me to focus about the local grassroots organizations to rebuild the country, it's the best way we can think about rebuilding the country. And when we're talking about capacity building, for whom and for what? What is the purpose? Like if we are having grassroots local organizations. And for us, we are working in a participatory model where we learn from the illiterate farmers, where we learn from the women, where we learn also from the kids. I might have a way of seeing or approaching things, they might have a different perspective. And also, I am a religious, a priest. I'm working with voodoo people, with all types of Christian denominations and other lay people. I might have my own view of seeing the reality, and I have to be ready to listen to them, you know, to learn from them. And it is in this space that we set up capacity building. That means, for sure, that's why for us at the University of Fondwa, we think if we have the resources, we can train 3 specialists for each one of the 570 rural communities in the next 15 years. We do need agronomists to work with the local grassroots organizations. If we want to address the problem of food security, national food production, taking care of the animals, and management, project management. That's why at the University of Fondwa we have just 3 schools. Agronomy, to accompany, to assist the farmers in their production, in their work of protecting the environment, to plant trees, reforestation, etc. And in Haiti, agriculture is linked with animal husbandry. That's why we have a school, a veterinarian school. And we do have a business school also, because there are so many projects going on around. Most of the time they fail because of lack of management. And that means there is a large range of education, of capacity building. So the children, we have children at our village, like we said. We have our kindergarten school, elementary school, high school. We have the groups, the organizations. You know, it's not the same level. But on the other hand, we need to have specialists in sustainable development working with the people. That's why for us the main thing is empower local grassroots organizations to create wealth in their communities. In each given community, there are a lot of resources. And the number one resource is high school graduate, which most of the time wants to give back, wants to help. But most of the times, those high school graduates have not given opportunities. And it's not the organization who want to contribute. They want to have opportunities. As a matter of fact, from during the last 10 years, we have sense about the young generation outside of Haiti already back. And they are in the leadership of organization now. We have sent them to France, to Trinidad, back to Brazil, and a little the US. All of them are not. But that's why we think, even though we take young high school graduates from their local communities, they will come back. As a matter of fact, we have from the University of for our first class 20 graduates. All of them are staying in Haiti, and they are working either in a community project or at their home communities. I think, talking about capacity building, we need to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of that? And we need also a lot of, when I say we, those of you who want to support Haiti, you really need to support the Haitian diaspora, the Haitian Americans who are here and who want to go back to help, but at the other hand, they have bills to pay here, and they don't want to not pay their bills. They want to have some type of security in order to bring their skills, their knowledge, their experience to Haiti, to rebuild Haiti. And I think there was a congressman from Oakland, California, who brought a bill like that to the Congress. You may help me. And I think she was asking to create a kind of Haitian Peace Corps. That means whoever Haitians want to go back home, they can be taken care of by the U.S. government, because they have given their energy, their resources here for many years, and rather than spending money for whatever purpose in Haiti, you can support them to go back home to Haiti. Because when we like having everybody coming to work with us, but when you have a Haitian, he or she has already the culture, the language skills, and also this person might be more able to adapt himself or herself to the Haitian reality than a foreigner. And for me, going back to say that a technical assistance for the local grassroots, it's something that we should do. Like you have the community colleges, community colleges here. Where you in Quebec you have the CEGEP. You have for us we have different levels. We call them animateurs, the facilitators, the bridges between the specialists and the local grassroots people. And even in the local grassroots organization, there are trainers, the trainers of trainers. It's a big chain, but it is, it's not only in the mind, but it's in the reality. You have to be on the site in order to understand this dynamic.
Well, I think Father Joseph and Marie-Cécile hit it right on the head, which is, what are we educating for? And more broadly, what are the development goals of the country? Because in the United States, our education is based on, we prepare folks to be disciplined and to be obedient for industrial jobs. I mean, the whole infrastructure from kindergarten to high school is built on that, right? Much like Germany. Our education system, the Haitian society, the Haitian societal system, nor the government has not made up its mind what the basic goal is for education, and for what industry are we training fundamentally or economic base. For what are we training our people for? So it does go back to, I believe Marie's right that there's essential basic capacities that exist, but there exists local knowledge. Local knowledge exists, but it hasn't been tied yet to science, or actually recognized as science. It could even be science, but it's not recognized because the narratives are very different. What we recognize, we Haiti, or Haitian rule recognize and actually use as science. I mean, we could not have survived because the midwives is the voodoo priestesses who deliver kids, Well, we're not monitoring or evaluating to find out what our levels of maternal rates are. And that's why I sort of agree and disagree with Marie, in that there's a certain level of capacity to which, when you're dealing with complex systems, where we do lack capacity. So we're existing between a traditionalist and a modernist sort of society, where traditionally, because the lack of infrastructure and because they're smaller community, the capacities exist because they live. And in fact, the population is growing. We have one of the highest fertility rates in the, in the Caribbean and Latin America. So we are surviving. It's not as if we're not surviving. The thing is, how are we surviving? And the capacity for what? Are we aiming to? And I go back to this sort of disconnect between what the donor is seeing as what capacity is, which is you have to be able to write a report, do a financial statement, do a proposal that sounds like you actually understand not just the language in which you're writing it, but the language in which the sector needs it. So that's actually an entire, entire industrial kind of thinking that the capacity doesn't have. So when donors come to Haiti and say Haitians have no capacity, you could take any undergraduate kids here and who's never seen a proposal, they too don't have the capacity that it takes. Because they haven't been trained in that sense, and so there is a threshold upon which we say, yes, let's start with what we already have. That I agree, but the threshold is to whatever goals for development. If Haiti says itself that I only want to reach, my vision of the world is to reach next door to the Dominican Republic, and my industry is tourism, and then so my aspiration is to become a chambermaid in a jardinier, then yes, we don't need any more capacity than what we have, because we'll tie it with agriculture. But if you say that we want to be, to take your hero, to take something to the moon, rocket ship to the moon, well, what we have right now does not bode well. So it goes back to where we really want to take, and the goals, and it's really based on our values, which really, in terms of values and norms and standards for Haitians, within which, whether it's education, whether from education, whether it's the way we organize our society, whether it's government, public sector, private sector, I mean, just you name it, it comes from normative values that the Haitian society itself has not been in agreement with. And if we have not agreed on just that basic principle, we cannot formulate visions for education or capacity.
If I may add one more thing, for me the main important thing is to educate the people to keep the resources of any given community in the community for the sustainable development of the community and for the benefit of its population.
Anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about what Tatiana just said, and I think I agree with her. Well, I can't figure out whether I agree with her at 100% or 50%. And
Make up your mind.
And here's why. I'm not sure that we need to. Obviously, before you set up a system, it's good to know what the goal is. But I'm not sure that we need to decide on an economic or social system before we start educating people. So the question is, should education be technical or political? And Marie said, well, that's a false choice. It obviously has to be both. My answer is that, or what I could add is that those two are necessary but not sufficient. I think technical education is training. It's teaching somebody how to operate a machine, something like that. So and you can do that fairly easily. I think there's another component, and that's what Tatiana mentioned earlier, and that's the critical thinking and the analytical piece. So obviously you have to have a skill. It's very important to have some skill that you can bring into the marketplace to get a job, feed your family, and be productive. But we've seen that basically in the post-industrial economy, a single skill isn't going to get you very far, because if this particular skill that you have is on a factory floor and that factory closes and moves someplace else, then you don't have the skills those skills aren't transferable. And what's really transferable is analytical skills, and that's what more and more people need in the post-industrial economy. So you need critical thinking skills to be a productive and prosperous member of the post-industrial economy. And it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in Martissant, Manhattan, or Mumbai. You need those same skills. I would add on the political end, and this is interesting, and this is something that we have learned at HELP over time. Recently, just 2 years ago, we added a mandatory 4-year curriculum in civic citizenship and leadership, because we were producing highly trained university graduates, engineers, doctors, lawyers, who had no problem getting a job. We have 100% employment rates. We've got average annual salaries that are 20 times the average annual salary of the salary of the average worker in Haiti. And this we were doing fairly successfully, but we saw that even with all of this education, that our graduates didn't really have a good idea of what their role was or what their role should be in society. And let me give you I give you 2 examples. One is a friend of mine who was not a HELP student, who comes from an educated family in Haiti, so part of the 0.3%, who went to a prominent Catholic girls' school in Port-au-Prince that caters to the 0.3%. And I asked her. She kept talking about her classmates and where they were, and over time I said, well, how many of the people you graduated high school with are still in Haiti? And she said, did the math and said, probably about 20%. And I said to her, well, when you were at school, didn't the nuns ever talk to you about what your responsibility was as part of the 0.3% to the other 99.7%, or to the society as a whole? And she said, oh no. She said, I think that they were very proud of the fact that we were able to be so successful outside of Haiti. So then there's a HELP student who went on scholarship to a prominent Catholic girls' school in Cap Haitian, again catering to the 0.3, the families of the 0.3%. And I, in a different context and not thinking about the previous conversation, because she mentioned something, and I said, did the nuns ever talk to you about this? And she said, oh no. She said, I never thought about what it meant to be Haitian before I came to HELP. So obviously this is a critical missing piece that we really need to address. So I would say this is, it's obviously there's technical, you need a skill, you need critical and analytical skills, and you need to understand who you are based on where you come from, what your history is, what your country's history is. Then based on who you are and what the skills that you have, the opportunities that you've had, what is your role in society and what is your responsibility? And these are absolutely critical to building a nation.
Then you 100% agree with me.
We can talk about that later. So in any case, and then just one more thing, and we've talked about, Father Joseph talks about opportunity and jobs and how many people stay. And basically what we found is that, people will stay if there are jobs for them. If you're educated, there are plenty of jobs for you, because it's supply and demand. There's a lot of demand for the 0.3%. But at another level, what kids there's, because of the lack of institutions in Haiti, and the lack of civic citizenship and leadership training, a lot of Haitians coming through the education system don't feel part of anything. They are absolutely and totally abandoned. Okay, they're left to their own devices at every stage, except obviously in the family. Once they step outside of their homes, there is no support, there is no structure, there is no encouragement, there is nothing. And when they start to see that they can really be a part of something that's bigger than themselves, that's when they really start to get engaged. So you can engage them on two levels. Obviously on an economic level, that's pretty easy. But on another, you need to also engage these people on another level. So I would just say, again, that you need, obviously you need technical, then you need another level up, you need critical and analytical skills to be a member of the post-industrial economy, and you want to call it political or civic, or so all of those three are absolutely necessary, and 2 out of 3 is just not going to do it.
I just want to rebuttal just for a little bit. So
Wait,
that
you said we were in
just wanna-
agreement.
No, we are.
That didn't last long, Tatiana.
I just want to clarify 2 things. You know, when we talk about a development goal for education, it could also be social cohesion goal, at arriving at a common value that, for example, Descartes' logic and reasoning and science is fundamental. It should be fundamental. Right now, we don't have it, right? So that gets at your preoccupation of these kids are all by themselves. Yes, because we have not arrived. Our education system doesn't serve as a social cohesion piece right now for our society, right? Because it does not represent the common values of the Haitians very clearly, right? And a common understanding of who we are and what we accept as our standards, Haitian standard, not Western standard. And to what aspect, what is it that we're rejecting or accepting from Western logic? And when you talk about analysis, you know, through what lens do we analyze? And what do we reject of our analysis? Because there's certain Western logic that goes totally opposite of how our logic and reasoning occur, to the point that they're always calling Haiti a paradox or contradictory. And well, there are different logics, and and folks fail to adopt to a Haitian logic that's very different. And again, when you say institution, I know Marie would say we have institutions, they're just not formalized, to the extent that the Western world accept them as institutions. The peasant organizations are very strong. They are institutionalized. There are some core values in them. They're not elevated to the Western thought of, okay, let's build a financial statement around it. And maybe that's what we ought to be doing, if that pleases the folks to give us more money, if that's where it is. But the analytical part, again, it has to depend on a common understanding and a common value system within which we have not gotten there yet. And if the international community was really serious about development, this is not just for Haiti. And by the way, Liberia is worse than Haiti in terms of capacity. 90% of their people are out of the country. So they would really start building a university partnership. They would really start building the core of the capacity building, deriving from Haitian understanding and the need for social cohesion and social healing within the society first and foremost, before we can go to the next step. But that's not going to happen, because nobody gives money for a country to develop out of its own.
You can't wait around for somebody to give you money to do that. I mean, you have to do that on your own. Democracy,
just like education, costs money. I'm sorry.
Everything.
We can't live on love alone. I mean, as many Haitians, and I love hugging Haitians. We could love each other forever, but you still need, the material. You still need the energy. You know, you got to build with our topography. It becomes even more difficult because it's in mountains that you're going to have to put these digicel towers to give you internet connection, to give you electricity, water system, sanitation system. How are you going to treat your water in the curvatures of these mountains? That's expensive. You need money. I'm sorry, I can't, I'm sorry this whole charity, thinking thought, but you need investments, and investments cost money.
No, I don't think you need. I don't think you need cash investment to decide on what your national priorities are. And
No,
what your,
but even that you need money. I'm sorry. You gotta pay lunch and you gotta pay transportation for people to
No, I disagree. I disagree.
Come on.
Okay,
I disagree.
Mary, if you allow me, the teaching and learning language in Haiti is French. That means you may find a Haitian who is high school graduate. This person might be illiterate in both languages. That means this person cannot write French correctly and cannot write Creole correctly. And I'm very proud of you to see there are a lot of people here who can speak Creole. Creole is really the language for rebuilding the country. Thank you, Mary.
I just want to add something. Thank you, Tatiana, for clarifying very well. I think that my recommendation is that we need, as a country, to stop relinquishing the curriculum and our education to foreign consultancy. We need to understand what the parameters that we talk about are formal and informal education, and what the norms in our country that we want to really compel. I mean, not revealing my age, but in my 60 years of life, when I was chez Madame Boisson, we had class that really address citizenry, that really address, how do you treat your older population, the importance of aging in a country and transfer your thinking, telling the stories. I remember when I'm born in Pétionville, where we sat at night and my father, my grandfather tell us the history that's not written of who we are and how we've become. This is being lost in Haiti. To the digital world, now we're connected to Facebook, we're really losing that. But I think that when I look at USAID has a contract with someone to come and improve the justice system, the French and the Canadian are vying for the educational curriculum. I'm asking myself, is this a new model of globalization that Haiti is going to be, diced and cut in pieces so that we can decide how to improve it? I think we have to go back and really within the framework of the values that you talk about, and within really the discourse, whether we have money or not have money, we need to reframe how we educate our children. And our language of education cannot be the French that actually sever the ties between the 90% of Haitian and the 10% in the urban area. It needs to be Creole, where Creole parler, Creole comprendre, that we understand each other. And we cannot stay now. I think that the threat is that our language is slowly becoming English.
Yes.
And
It's not so bad.
is a major issue. That we assume that because the American dollar dominates the Haitian market, that everything has to be in US, and that now every one of our children are really competing to speak in English versus really speaking in Creole. And we really have to create a balance. What is Haitian? In our educational system, how do we promote what is Haitian? What are the values that we hold dear, that we need to maintain, and how do we maintain it within the curriculum of a primary, secondary, and university education?
I don't know if you allow me, I can make a request. We have a Haitian specialist in education here, Michelle. I don't know if you want to make a comment from what we have
They
said.
have not opened to the floor yet.
Very soon. This is just one last question, and then you can start the open to the floor part
Okay.
of the panel.
Thank you.
These are really interesting comments and insights. So, something I'm that I'm interested in asking, and hopefully this will seem complementary to what you've been discussing about what success looks like, and this issue of, maybe this is related to this quote brain drain. My question is, how would you compare a structural method of capacity building that might have expectations and specific goals with initiatives that leave maximum decision making to the beneficiaries, something like cash payouts to individuals so that they can do what they want with that resource? And are there certain contexts in which a cash payout style of investment is more or less ideal than something more structured or infrastructural? Does that make sense?
Is this for education?
About
I don't-
capacity building maybe in general, but
Yeah.
it could also speak to education possibly.
I just want to understand the question. Cash payout to attain capacity building?
Something like for the cash payout, for example, if you give someone money and then they can choose to live where they want, or you can give someone money and it's contingent that they live in a specific place, for example. Or education may be related to the brain drain. If you give someone resources to do what they want, should you have a contingent expectation that they do something specific? Or if they join the diaspora, is that also capacity building with the same efficacy, if that makes sense?
I can give you an example. Actually, in Fondoa, we are running a food security project, but we have transformed it into a wealth creation project, meaning giving a few jobs to the people and helping some of them to create some small businesses, which is in the idea of keeping the resources of the community in the community for the sustainable development of the community and the benefit of the people. What we are trying to do, we give an investment package to the beneficiary, which has threefold: seed, technical assistance, and a little amount of money. And like, you know, if we are dealing with yam production and a banana production. You know, if it were in an emergency relief project, we would have given 5 seeds of bananas to the individuals, and we left them alone. But because it is in the spirit of a wealth creation project, we are trying to give a business to the beneficiary. And that means it's not the only income that they have, it's an additional income that they will have. You know, like first they have to fill out, to fulfill a lot of criteria, you know, and after that, after being selected, we give them the package. And part of the package is to teach them also to know that there is a cost for whatever assistance, technical assistance that they have received. And as you know, in Haiti, if you have a physician working with the people in the countryside, they know that they have to give a small amount of money for the exam, you know, to see the doctor. But if you are an agronomist or a veterinarian doctor or a manager working with them, they don't know that. But we are teaching them how to do that. That means from their income, they have to give, from their profit, they have to give 10% to us, to our organization. And this 10% is divided in 3. They have a small working group, and their small working group has a committee, and this, we can say 3% out of the 10 go to their small working committee. And they have also a central committee, which is their directors committee. They give 2%. And the other 5% go to the technicians who are working with them. And also part of the requirement is to sell back to us their production. We will add values to that. You know, that means we buy from them their a production with the market costs. And we will have to add values to that. And for us, you know, we are having 100 small enterprises like that in the community. But you know, the way we evaluate that, it's about how many of them will be successful. You know, but so far we're not there yet. But we might. But at the beginning, we tried to secure at least 55% of the success, because you know we give the package to those who can secure some type of profitability. You know, like if somebody said that I can produce bananas on my soil, we have to send somebody to make a soil testing to see if this farmer can produce bananas there. And the second thing, if this qualified person fails, now we give him a job. And out of the job, we ask him to save between 20 and 25% of his salary. And then at the end of the program, we'll ask him to move from being an employee to being self-employed, to be an entrepreneur. And we double his savings. You know, this is the dynamics we put in place to evaluate, you know, what you would call capacity building.
I want to give an example from an integrated development project that we've done in the south of Haiti. I have to start out to say cash payouts in themselves don't work, only because we tend to forget that development is a long-term project, program, not even a project. It's a lifetime commitment. It's a preoccupation, not just an occupation. It's, you know, it's from who you are, and it takes a lifetime when you come from a country as poor as Haiti. It requires capacity building in that sense, requires hand holding from A to Z, you know, and that takes years, that takes generations to do. So in the South, what we had tried to do, so we were looking for sort of scientists, you know, folks who at least with masters or at least with a BA to come and lead the different sectors, whether it was health, education, infrastructure, across the board. And, you know, all these folks had left their towns and had gone to Port-au-Prince, so we found them in Port-au-Prince, asking them to come back to Les Anglais Chardonniers, Pois Piment, et Coteau. And they're like, well, if I leave, then I won't have my UN contact, so if I need to write another you know, contract, I'll be stuck in Chardonnier, and I will, you know, not have my, you know, the folks around me to make sure, because, and it's the way in which we do programs, right? We give 1 year projects, you know, and folks with families are not going to leave to go somewhere, much like the diaspora, for 1 year at a time with even if you give them benefits for 1 year with no long-term you know, attraction. Now the diaspora, to go get them, they're worried about their 401ks. This is another type of priority. The diaspora is actually quite expensive. The diaspora is actually like the technical assistance, foreign technical assistance. We're literally Westerners, period. I mean, there's no, you know, and they would be really upset if you give John Smith X amount of money and you give Jean Joseph the other X amount of money. That's really and if we have the same education. And so playing around this framework, you need to reconceptualize the entire way in which you enter into this capacity building framework. What we did actually end up doing, because the big problem, in whether it was Chardonnier or Les Anglais, Coteau, Pois Piment, is that once the kids graduated from high school or even l'école fondamentale, they had to go either to CAI for secondary school, or they ended up in Port-au-Prince. How do you retain them? Because these are brilliant, I mean, like Maggie was saying in Father Joe, these are bright kids. How do you retain them? So then there are programs that we thought of, let's say in the health sector, that actually retain them, give them do a certificate program where you give them a living wage for their commitment. If you give them a living wage, and you certify them, there's this social aspiration that they have a certificate that they're now a community health worker, right? Or they're certified midwife. And you're keeping them within their community to, just like you're doing through your program. It becomes much more a social cohesive community where you have folks with diplomas on their brick wall at home, right? And part of the community. They become your footless doctors and your footless teachers. And that really is at the head of it. So kinds of schemes like, cash for work doesn't work. It's long-term, a career-oriented type of just like here. I mean, you're not going to take Peace Corps. I'm sorry, Peace Corps doesn't work for diaspora. We're not going to come for two weeks. No way. We'll go family vacations. We'll go to a fête champêtre for 2 weeks and call it a day. It just doesn't work. I'll just stop there.
So I'll give 3 examples about the cash transfers and their role in different, development contexts. So the first is, say, in the emergency. I mean, obviously in the emergency context, when you're trying to get very basic goods to people who don't have access to them, either because the goods aren't available or they've lost the ability to pay for them. And Matt Marek was talking about this yesterday in the context of the earthquake. And the figures I've seen are that in order for an outside entity, be it the government or an NGO, to get those basic goods to you, the cost of delivery to the beneficiary is about 8 times the cost of buying it on the local market. So here clearly, and it takes a lot more. It takes a lot longer as well. So clearly not clearly not an efficient system. And as Matt pointed out yesterday, this direct cash transfer in this context, probably the absolutely most efficient way to get goods into primary goods, necessary goods and services into the hands of people who need them. So in that context, I think absolutely the best way. When I started helping out students going to college in Haiti, I said I would pay for tuition and books. First of all, because I couldn't afford a lot more than that, and second of all, because those are the things that I could track. And so there were no cash transfers, so to speak. And one day, one young woman from Cité Soleil who I was supporting in medical school came to me with her report card, and she had passed, but really the grades were pretty mediocre. And I said, well, these grades, I really would have expected more from you. And her reply was, well, I actually expect more of myself. But it's been particularly difficult. And she said, I have to spend an hour, at least an hour getting to school, and then an hour getting home on the tap. In the wintertime, it's dark when I get home. I have to study whatever it be, anatomy, biochemistry, or whatever it is, by candlelight. I'm up very late. I have to then get up in the morning and do the whole thing over again. But even with all of those difficulties, I think I'd be doing much better if we were eating every day at home. I said that's no excuse. No. So clearly in this context, this kind of the tuition and books was not going to cut it. And now every help student receives a stipend of between $75 and $100 a month. We just give it to the student and they do whatever they want with it. But basically, it's for food and transportation. So in some contexts, the cash component is absolutely essential. And the final example I'll give you very quickly is I worked for a grassroots an organization, an NGO doing grassroots civic education. And we in the rural communities all over the country, and we didn't. Well, actually, when I came in, the director and I decided that we were going to cut off any kind of assistance we were giving the people other than the training, the education. So there was no lunch, there was no water, there was no reimbursement of transportation expenses, be it $10, $5, or $1, because we wanted to make sure that everybody who was showing up to get what we had to give them, and that is the training, rather than the lunch or the water or $5. And we were up in a very remote area called Grand Bois Cornillon. We're driving to one of the sessions. We picked up a guy who didn't know that we were, and he had our little textbook in his hand. And so we said, "Oh, where are you going?" He said, "Oh, I'm going to this training up the road." And we said, "Oh, are you from around here?" Because he didn't recognize that we were the same organization that was giving the training. And he said, "Oh no, I'm from this." The name's a neighboring community. And we said, "Oh, is this your organization that's meeting here?" And he said, no, this is another organization. My meeting was yesterday. We said, "Oh, did you miss the meeting yesterday? So it's kind of like you missed a Tuesday's class, so you're going to Wednesday's class?" He goes, no, I was at the training yesterday. We said, "Well, how long does it take you to get from where you live to this training?" He goes, "Oh, it's about an hour and a half." We said, "Well, you went to the training yesterday, and you're walking an hour and a half today to go to the same training that you just went to yesterday." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why are you doing that?" He said, "Look, I got to tell you something." He goes, "This information is so important for me and my community, I can't afford to miss a word." And so, in the final context is you just have to be sure that when there's money involved, that everybody is focused on the goal, and certainly, so in some contexts you need to remove the cash transfer. And then in other contexts, you need to add it, but it just depends. It depends on the context. So that's what I would say about where that fits in. So it's kind of a long and complicated answer, but anyway.
Okay, let's do the reverse. Cash distribution can work, but let's talk about the context. 18-year history, working with the community, developing and building trust, and having also a monitoring system in place locally that sees how the organization functions. Lambi Fund has done that, and post-earthquake, we spent $1.2 million in Haiti, and right after Sandy, we spent an additional $62,000. We are not only in Haiti for crisis management, we're in long term. And so because we are in long term, we maintain communication through education. We have yearly conference, regional conference, equity gender treatment conference that addresses the issue, in which we have added as of late the responsibility for citizenship. In doing so, we develop the type of relationship where when we go to a meal, we can open the books and see exactly how many people come, how many members of the organization are benefiting, how many members of non-members of organization that are benefiting, in what way that constitute growth and reduce poverty in the areas. So what happened post the earthquake? Post earthquake, the first order of is just getting in touch with local partners. When we did get in touch with local partners, they constituted working groups that went almost door to door with their members and find out how many people were received. How many children that were in school in Port-au-Prince came back, those who were hurt, those who needed to go back for medical treatment. As you know, medical treatment is not à la portée de la main right there, so that they had to travel. So there was distribution of cash for those organizations and through those organizations for medical transportation, for buying medical goods, and to receive the people so that they can be fed. Some people came with just a shirt threaded on them. They had no clothes. They had to find some clothing, some basic things for children of rural farmers who were going to school in Port-au-Prince and other places, and other members of family who had gone and returned. So the cash management, the ability for our monitors who are local to work with the network, the long-term history of working made a big difference. So secondly, our second component of our response was buying seeds. we realized that there was a threat immediately to the local economy. So we needed to buy seeds that are from the area to kind of stimulate the transfer of funding. So the next level of expenditure was buying seed to distribute to farmers, because they needed not only to replace the seeds that they were using, but they needed to plant. And the third level was to assist them with cash money so that they can hire more people to till the land or hire ox plow to till, so that we can create a greater harvest for the next season. Climatic events, on the side. So, and right post Sandy, I just come back from Haiti from a meeting with the 14 organizations that we have current project going. And this is one of the need for ongoing partnership and discourse. We had 14 projects that started between 2011 and 2012. All of them were impacted by Sandy. So we needed to assess very quickly what were the damages, and in what way can we repair the damage to bring it up to par, to go back to the level of functioning of the organization. The reality is that if we have a one-year program, as you talked about, Tatiana, it's not realistic to think that we can have success if we don't have the capacity to intervene post-Sandy. For example, KPM, which is in Mac, near Baradere, they had lost all the tunnel trellis that were above the 60,000 seedlings that they were planting. So we needed and this is a windy area, so we needed immediately to replace the tunnel. They couldn't find the cocoa, leaf cocoyer pour couvrir le tunnel. They had to go outside of there to find leaves, other leaves to cover the trellis.
You'll find it in Saint-Jean.
There you go. So it's a very important that basic knowledge and connection is maintained, so that we can, and we were able to respond to Sandy to provide immediate monies for them to buy and to create the tunnel and save 50,000 of the plants. So when you build this kind of relationship, it is manageable. And when you build capacity for management, you can see the documentation. And we have had documentation that we think is stupendous for ourselves. For example, IGSDC, the mill that I just came back from, not only that within 1 year, they created, with their resources from the organization, mill for corn, which we paid for. They bought their own mill for rice, and the debouchure that separate the cost of the rice with the pod. They bought that. We have seen the consumer use coming from 60% member to 30% member, so that we can see the impact into the larger community. So over more non-members of that organization is using the mills to process the grain. So we can immediately see the beginning impact. What we also see is the burgeoning market that comes when the women come with the grain to mill. Then you have people selling tablets, and you have people selling soap, and you have a burgeoning small economy around that mill. And so what we added bathrooms, we added water tower that collect the rainwater so people can wash hands, to reduce the whole need of cholera, which I'm sure sometime today we'll hear about. So I think that when we look at the context, cash management can work. And I think that there is a premise that says you don't give cash to the beneficiaries, they're gonna do whatever they want with it. But I think when you have the commitment that we talked about, when you have the engagement that Father talked about, you do have people who are conscious of the image, they are conscious of the character and integrity of the community, and spend appropriately.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you to everyone. On behalf of myself and the Haiti Lab, I think everyone deserves a round of applause.
Before going on, if you allow me, I will say two things. First, there is a document that I have produced, Haiti Lab has it. It's empowering local grassroots organizations to create wealth in rural Haiti. If you want a copy of it, just send a note to the Haiti Lab. And I do have some requests from the organizer. You know, the first one is to help us to continue, you know, as grassroots organizations working together in Haiti or for Haiti, to have a kind of roundtable where we can continue this type of dialogue. And the second thing, I need a lot of help from Duke University. I need to make assessments of resources available in all of the 570 rural communities in Haiti. We want to make assessments of them, you know, to see what are the resources that they have available and how we can use them to create wealth in those given communities. And since you have also a school public policy, we need to find a way to create an institute of governance in Haiti to train the judges, the police, the lawyers, and also the CASEC, ASEC, the mayors, and the Congress people. We need to help them to take responsibilities for their elected ones. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you.
Okay, so we don't have a mic, I don't think, for the audience, so if anyone could just,
It's a
okay.
small room.
Yeah, so, shall I repeat the
No,
question?
speak up. Stand up and speak up,
There you
please.
go.
Okay.
That's right.
That's with authority, too. So this issue of capacity building in education is close to me as a practitioner who pre and post earthquake was always looking for qualified people. And I think some of the things that were discussed today address some of the questions and comments that came up yesterday around NGO presence and taking qualified people from the government and further weakening the government. But I think that, you know, the question that wasn't further asked yesterday is that's an issue of supply and demand. It certainly is a problem, so how do you address the supply? And I think some of the topics that were discussed here talk about how you address that supply. And I think the panelists identified sort of rural and urban context in which both contribute to the long-term development and challenges that Haiti faces, which is investment in the rural context hopefully sways migration into the urban areas, which are growing, and the urban education and capacity building hopefully addresses the brain drain topic, and then we create a stronger government. And all of your anecdotes and testimonials talked about examples and successes, you know, to some of the work that's been done. But if I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the trends in Haiti are different. There's, you know, if we look at Haiti today, the brain drain is still an issue, migration to urban areas are still an issue. So my question to the panel is how do you take your successes to scale? And what are the impediments to doing that, if any? And concrete examples of scaling up on both those areas would be helpful. And then secondly, in more detail, the topic around education and Creole versus French. This is not something that was just talked about today at this panel. This has been an ongoing topic of discussion for decades in the Haitian education system. So what are the impediments to making that a reality at either the primary school and or secondary school? And is it something that is being worked through the system that will be adapted, that will contribute overall to the improvements of the education system?
I think before anyone responds, we can take another question and the panelists can, okay, go ahead.
As we talk about capacity building, I can't see capacity building without capacity maintaining and sustaining. Now, for long years, even when we talk about people coming from outside to help, but despite the fact that we may criticize them, that, you know, how they do things, methodology they use, but also the idea of us, Haitians, to maintain what we are given. Now, as we talk about education, you know, for history, we are marked by history. And Haitians are wounded. You know, it's a kind of, you know, whatever we build, it's a matter of tomorrow we destroy it. Now, how do you, in your project, you perceive to have a component or any other project the component of mental health. Now, when we talk about mental health in Haiti, it's a non-touchable thing. It seems like psychology is, for those who learn it, you have your diploma on the wall, that's it. But really, we need to touch this issue.
Okay.
Because we're dealing with people who are wounded for history, throughout history. And whenever you come to build, now are you building infrastructures or are you building people? To make them capable of maintaining, sustaining what they are given.
I want to take, is that, okay, I think I want to do the two together, right? So the scale up, I could only do it through development practice, right? So we're not going to Haiti's not going to get away from the 10,000 NGOs that it already has. I mean, the system is built to, it has its own internal logic already. It's a business. I mean, let's just be clear. I mean, it's just a business. International aid system, the entire complex is a business. And the poorer you are, the better the business is. I mean, take Bangladesh. I mean, it's the poor, and you have to keep poor so that the business could keep flourishing. So if Haiti does have 1% more, it's so funny. Just this year alone, the government says it wants 8% increase. Well, it only got 2.7, but just the estimation that you're going to go growing, the NGO started floundering, and getting really people upset because it's a business internally, it's a business outside. Let's not just, let's just keep it that way. Now, within this internal logic, just like, yesterday's Obama's thing on the food, we can do the same thing with NGOs, whereby you say, and in the private sector actually, there's laws in the books for Haiti that if you enter the soil, 30% of your top tier folks have to be Haitian. Period. It's a learning by doing process. Okay, and what happens right now is that within all the NGOs, the top brass from the first 3 tiers of management, it's all foreign, and then and the NGO has to relearn all over again when their 2-year contracts are over, and it starts all over again, and you never really have it. Now, the reason we say that, for it to be scalable and for it to be sustainable and for it to be maintained, is that you could foresee the country taking, just like the United States right now, all your social services are provided by, well, you don't call them NGO, but nonprofits. From orphanages to the public sector doesn't provide jack, they just supervise, right? Your entire structure is provided by, and you subsidize private sector too, hospitals, it's all, so you could see that movement, because of our capacity problem, that NGOs are going to be contracted out to perform the work. But right now, the way it's not done with Haitian capability, with the view of enhancing the capacity, so that the share of the budget has to go to hire Haitians so that it's scalable in terms of getting your capacity building, and that it's long-term vis-a-vis those who are going to provide sector services for a long time. Now, I won't touch the mental health issue, because you right, it's a 200-year-old healing process that only a strong and sort of paternalistic type of government could help push forward, or a very strong civil society group, which I don't see anything yet coming. And so it's a huge issue. This is not just Haiti, this is all over the fragile states. The top 45 countries in the world suffer from this healing problem. That's that's such a huge problem, I'll leave it alone.
I want to address the first question. How do we scale up our success? You know, our strategy is to give priority to higher education, to educate high school graduates from the countryside so that they can go back home to create wealth in their communities. And that's why I hope that my colleague panelists will start sponsoring communities. And we want, as you know, we have 570 rural communities, and we need to train at least 3 high school graduates to go back to work in those communities. For us, that's the strategy, to scale up and also to create wealth in those given communities.
If I may say a couple of things about it before the next hand. Sorry. The issue of mental health is one within our thinking and our culture that we simply do not accept. You know, in a way, tout le temps nous pas saute tomber, nous pas malade. Tout le temps nous pas courir, nous pas fou. Comprenez-vous? Exact. C'est un bagage, voisin a fait nous. Tout le monde qui mourit en Haïti, mourit parce que c'est un monde qui fait le bagage. Li intégrer la pensée, it's kind of entrenched in the way of thinking to logically have an understanding of why things happen. And without a model of leadership that could espouse to stand a continuous model of self-strengthening, strengthening the core of being a Haitian, we are not moving from that, because otherwise it became chaotic in our thinking. So I think that embracing mental health issue, I can only speak from my social work background because of what I've seen and what I've worked with. It is a full-size reconciliation with yourself and reconciliation with and a deliberate process of creating change. And we need leadership in order for us to do that, and we are in a crisis of leadership. But we are strong in that, and I think one of the ways that we choose to scale up within the Lumby Fund, I'm just taking that example, is that from the onset, when people are defining what their priorities are, they are better at scaling up because they are participants from the onset, defining the priority, selecting what projects they want to work on, looking for solutions, be part of the process of assessing implementation and evaluation, sitting as part of the builder of their own community, which is what we're lacking in what exists currently in Haiti. We have everything coming from the top down, and the priorities are shifted. We're taking away from governments, we're taking away from people, we're managing close to what our own perception is in terms of expatriates doing management, doing planning, etc. So there is a disconnect all around. But if we're clear on some of the priorities, we can do some scaling up. But I think what we find right now that we're seeking, and every time I see Camille, I said, we have to talk. Every time I see, I'm going to keep saying it. We need to build collaboration where we cross-exchange our learning and be able to be supportive of components that we cannot do. I think Lumby does fairly well working with rural communities, and we continue to scale that up. But in terms of the advocacy within, managing a movement, creating a social change movement, we need to partner with others to support that process. Convening at a conference where people are simply and ongoingly talking about the context they live that is unbearable, give us an indicator that there needs to be a space for dialogue among the community itself to define where they need to go as a community. We don't have the capacity to do it, but maybe together in a collaboration we can do it. So I think there is need for partnership collaboration with clear goals. As Haitians, maybe we're not gonna agree on every single thing, but we can agree that there is a need for convening to dialogue in the context of what's going on in our country.
I would just quickly say about scale, and it's something that we face every day. And there has to be a really multifaceted approach to scale. I think the first, and it takes different times at different levels. First thing that I think that we can do is show people how effective this is, how effective higher education is with, and in resolving all kinds of problems. And then some people will adopt it simply because they're interested in new ideas. I'll give you a couple of examples. Then so when we started the scholarship program, very few of the universities even had a functioning computer lab. None of them had any kind of robust English language program, and none of them had a career services program. And now I go to the universities, and they all have, many more of them have functioning computer labs. And one or two schools of the private universities, one school is starting a career services department, and two are starting English language programs. So I think that people who are involved in the same industry, who are interested in making progress and good ideas, will adopt ideas that they see work for them at one level. On a second level, what we need to do, certainly is HELP and institutions like HELP. We can never, ever be responsible or be one of the primary responsible organizations for higher education in the country of Haiti. It won't work. We can show people what works on a small scale, try to do what we do at a larger level, and then try as hard as we can to interest other people who have more resources than us in doing this. We are always looking to attract larger funders to scale up what we're doing, so we can reach more kids. But in the end, I think it's really I'd say two institutions that have the most resources and then maybe the most responsibility for higher education. One is the church. I would say it's the first university, the first Catholic university on the Spanish side of Saint-Domingue was established in 1530. It was less than 40 years after Columbus landed in 1492. There was an institution of higher education. It was a religious one. It was an institution of higher education. The first Catholic university in Haiti dates to 1995. That's a lag of 500 years. Well, and let me show you what that produces. Michelle was telling me that just last week she was in Santo Domingo. She was invited by the Haitian Students Association at the Public University of Santo Domingo, where the enrollment is a similar population, right around the same population between Dominican Republic and Haiti. There are 150,000 students, according to Michelle, enrolled at the Public University of Santo Domingo. That's only one of the public universities in the Dominican Republic. It's the largest one, obviously, capital city, but it's the largest one. There are probably 10 to 15,000 students enrolled in the State University of Haiti. So clearly, the end responsibility for education at all levels lies with the state, and so and there you just need to. I think everybody needs to push. You need to push. Basically, you need to play the political game, lobbying for more resources and better training and more accountability from the state university. So I would say, you have to do all of those things pretty much at the same time, and some will take longer than others. But the more people that know how effective this is, the faster it will change.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to thank the panelists for an extraordinary panel. I think you guys got to so many key issues. With the issue of education, it's striking for me just historically, right? There's a moment in the 1920s when the United States puts a lot of investment into sort of technical education, which founders for all kinds of interesting reasons. But there is this fundamental problem of the kind of divide over what education should mean, right? I think that the Creole is part of it, right? Until that question is resolved, the bigger question can't be resolved. But that's just a symptom of a broader thing, which is that there are, I mean, I think of Haiti as very much part of the West, actually having helped to create the West, and there's the West very much in Haiti, but there are also all these other forms, right? There's Africa and Haiti. Haiti is a universal society, right, that has all these trajectories. Within Haiti's own intellectual history, you can find so many things, right? You can find the historical work, psychiatry, medicine. I mean, there's these incredible resources published in French, yes, and not as well known as they should be. And then you have this incredible knowledge that's in rural communities, right, about forms of how to grow things, how to organize societies, how to deal with dissension, right, community forms of dealing with violence, with property debates, all these kinds of things, right? So there's just all this capacity there. The thing is that much of that knowledge has been built over the last 200 years precisely in order to resist control, exploitation, right, invasion, loss of resources from outside. The whole point of much of that knowledge has been from the revolution through the 19th century to resist either insiders who are trying to control and then outsiders who are trying to control. And so that knowledge has been built for specific historical reasons to survive and to thrive under duress, right, and under constraints. And so there's a tension there, right? There's a kind of old conflict over what it means to be Haitian, what it means to be free, what it means to have autonomy, have dignity. And that's the tension that is at work until the educational system somehow in Haiti invites and embodies all of those components, right? I don't think it can really educate, and that's that kind of critical thing. Part of it is to develop a kind of a capacity in Haitian education that is also very much about Haiti, that draws on all these knowledges. Part of it is just to admit that there's a conflict, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even in the United States, of course, we're debating all the time what education, the 19th century industrial model of education is under duress. Of course, education in the United States is also about producing elites and reproducing elites. I mean, all these things are true elsewhere. Maybe, what can be hopeful is we can imagine that Haiti might be, as it has been at certain times in its history, a place where these very imaginative solutions can be made to what education means. So I think that would be kind of critical to imagine, and this is where the collaboration is very important, because until the forms of knowledge that are deep within Haitian culture are recognized as science and as valid, at the same time as we should never turn our back on any form of knowledge in the world that is useful, right? And I think Haitians wouldn't, right? They've always drawn on any number of traditions. So to acknowledge the power of one's own knowledge is not to refuse what can come from outside, but it has always been so so much of and I fear that right now the kinds of educational initiatives may just reproduce. Sometimes we feel like we might be back in the 1920s where someone's going to say, oh, what Haitians really need to know is this, but not really listen on the other side. And if we do that, then there's not going to be progress. So anyway, I just wanted to comment about that.
I was wondering if you may speak to the ways that NGOs and humanitarian groups and the government operate in Haiti may be able to address some of the concerns surrounding issues facing the world and in Haiti, in particular towards education, which we can bring them within out of the informal sector, economy, bring them into the formal sector, and bring them into a participation and participation in the political sphere, and what role they would do
I want to start by just mentioning from what Lola says, strong governments or strong systems, like take Japan, they look at it through comparative systems view, right? So they don't just take Western logic for what it is. They're just, from the day one of your education, they look at that sort of total breadth of this is how the Americans think, and this is how the Chinese think, and this is how we think, and let's analyze all of that. And so they're pretty advanced in the way they've done things. And of course, Haiti could think to do that. To answer the gentleman's question on gender, you see, and to rejoin both. And I think I've been for the last 15 years. I have been, I don't know, till I'm blue in the face, I've been asking the top donors, starting with the United States and the entire UN system, which now I believe are really bent to not doing anything about Haiti, is first thing, we don't have information. Haiti has not really we don't have a national information system by which you go by. Everybody has an evaluation and monitoring system all to itself. This NGO is basing, their outcomes on, okay, I hired 2 people, 3 people came to meet, then that's my performance. Nobody's understanding, for example, whether we really have gender equality issues or not. And by the way, we really don't. I think the problem is women against women more than women against men. Like when you take the gender, where we have actually done baseline surveys in sectors like education, there's no real gender disparity until you get to second year, your secondary school. Like primary school, you hardly have gender disparities. It's secondary school where money is tighter because it's school. 90% of schools are private, so you have to choose who you send to school. So it becomes a financial issue more than anything. To answer the question on the informality of women, that goes back to the centrality of again, common values and societal and cohesion, and really racism and prejudice of the private elite. Most of these women make actually more money than half of these guys who nice suits and having big, beautiful, SUVs. These same women, like in places I've gone to West Africa, they're called Mama Benzes because they drive Mercedes-Benz. In Haiti, these women do send their kids to Harvard and Cornell and at Columbia, and they have PhDs and they come back, or they stay actually in the United States or France or wherever they go. But the prejudice against these women as a group, which is the core, they're the economic core of the country. I mean, because we're based on a commerce economy. We import everything, and the agricultural backbone in terms of its commerce and commercialization. It's the backbone of the country, but we refuse to see them as the elite that they are. Because historically they're manosalad, they're birds. They'll fly away or they'll go. They're not the economic elite. And so again, it goes back to our central value system about who we think of elite. Because in Haiti today, the elite are the light-skinned folks. To the extent that we've got some more rice importers who are black, and then we're getting some some black males. But fundamentally, our common system is that these women are the backbone, and they're recognized for what they are, and they're actually the economic elite. I believe what you can do for the other gentleman's question, if all of us we don't monitor the system. The reason that an NGO could come and plop themselves in Haiti with absolutely nothing to show for millions of dollars after they're spent, because we don't hold them. No one holds anybody accountable because there's no numbers to begin with. We don't know. We don't even have identity cards for our own people in Haiti, so much less data. Right? So if you don't really know the impact you want to have or what you have, let's take the education system. The Minister of Education doesn't even know where its schools are. So to the extent the other day a big scandal of $780 million have gone, $65 million have gone missing because 760 schools didn't really exist, is because they didn't even have a list of where schools are. We don't know where water points are. We don't know the content of our soil. We don't know Texas. University of Austin, Texas, comes to do some testing about what our reserves are in gold or reserves are in natural gas or oil. Nobody sees the report. Information is not shared with anybody. NGOs go with a whole heck of a lot of information. I mean, they've come up with lots of report. It's in somebody's drawers, right? The government after government, each set of the donor sets come up with beautiful studies on whatever. Nobody's sharing any of this information. So you're always starting anew about what we know about the country, who the beneficiaries are. You say you serve 10,000 people, where are they? The report doesn't even, sometimes the reports are so bad also at the same time, you don't even know where you're serving. So I'm on a mission to, and this is for all fragile states, this is for not for Haiti because I teach on other countries, is that first and foremost that the donor community and a government must insist is to have a real true baseline for monitoring, like a monitoring platform that goes to the level of the section communale, okay, that you know what you have and what you don't have. So if CRS says they have, $20 million for Chardonnay, you're gonna ask them visually, and the technology exists there today that could visually see what CRS is doing in Chardonnay. Today, it doesn't exist. So if you really truly want to do, and especially for a illiterate population, seeing is believing. We all Saint Thomas. If we don't see it, we don't know that it really exists. So to the extent that we could take advantage of existing technologies and to put together a monitoring system that, and information that really, really serves the country, instead of NGOs, sort of like the donors, they plant their flags. I just want to deal with Bagadere, or I just want to deal with. Everybody has a flag all across the country, and it's a nice flag, but it's still not Miami, and maybe.
To address the gender issue, in my work, we are trying to give access to higher education to women and also economic power. In that sense, we can resolve the problem of disparity. As a matter of fact, if we have a sponsor who wants to sponsor a community, if we are taking 3 students, we will favor 2 female students, but they have to be qualified. And the second question, I just want to share with you that we are having a volunteer program, and Family Health is very involved. Family Health is a group working here at Duke. The director is here, Kathy Walmer. And we have volunteers from all over coming to work with us, and we have some nice stories about volunteers from Family Health who come to work with us. We have 2 students from Duke University, Jamlyn Williamson and David Williamson. Right after the wedding, they come to Fondoa. They stay with us for 2 years, and they still connected with us. They are helping us to rebuild the community. And there are times we have 10 different nationalities living together, like we have Cubans, we have Americans, French, Canadians, Dutch, and that has helped Fondoa to become an international peace center. But if you want to know more about that, again, write to the Haiti Lab, and they will give you the information.
Just very quickly about girls, and I think that certainly there are extra obstacles that girls face, both getting into school and staying in school, and Tatiana talked about some of those. With the school enrollment rates as low as they are, even at the primary level, I mean, the single greatest thing that we can do is put pressure on the government to meet their constitutional obligation to provide public schooling for every child, whether they're a boy or a girl. And if there's free school, then every single girl will go to school. If there's free public education, like there is in almost every single other country in the world, every single girl will go to school. So I mean, that's obviously it's a longer term solution. It takes a lot of work. It's not, you can't sponsor a kid. It's less direct than sponsoring any particular student, but I think in the end it's that simple. To Laurent's point, I think this is, goes hand in hand with what I was talking about what teaching people what it means to be Haitian, or just talking, not even teaching, asking them, talking about it. And one of the huge gaps in the Haitian education system is history, and I think that this teaching people their own history plays a huge role in that people understanding who they are, where they come from, what their culture is. There is no undergraduate history program. You cannot get an undergraduate degree in history in Haiti. So this is a place that has one of the most exciting, unique, and richest histories of any country in the world, and you can't even study that at the university level. So I think that's something that needs to be changed. And once you understand your history, then you can have the discussion of what it means to be Haitian. How do we do things? What we do works, and what we should keep, these things that are unique to us, and what in our culture doesn't work, and what are other ways of doing it that might work here. But again, I think it all lies on understanding where you came from, understanding your history. And then lastly, for Brian's question about what people can do to help organizations working in Haiti, and what Tatiana said is there's no data on Haiti. It's very difficult to get information, and I think so my advice to people who want to help out in Haiti and countries like Haiti is there's really, the most effective way is to go to that country, is to spend some time and to learn about how it operates, because it operates on such a different premise than what we're used to. And there is a lack of data, let alone reliable data. And the only way to really understand how these societies work is to go and experience it through, say, a program like the Peace Corps or some long-term volunteer program. The more you know about the country, the more you will have ideas about how you can be most effective helping out. But I think from a distance, if you've never been there, it's very, very difficult to understand how to be most effective. So my advice would be get on the plane and go to wherever it is that you're interested in.
Okay, we have 10 minutes left or so we can get the next two questions, and then the two hands that were up, I think you can ask. Go ahead.
What really kind of catches me is the idea of pedagogy of higher order thinking skills, the idea of training people how to think. I think the idea of teaching people how to think comes with a very profound assumption. And that's the assumption is that the person doing the teaching knows how to think themselves. I think this idea that there's sort of a natural tutelary role that the wealthy United States is going to have for this poor, suffering Haiti. People are, pretty good at often thinking for themselves, and that's why so many have drawn the conclusion that the NGO and aid bureaucracy complex is part of the ongoing imperial relation of the poor, exploited country with the wealthy country. And the idea that the people there don't know their own history, that's a guaranteed bear trap that people step into. And it makes all the local experts of the history bristle. All the native population that knows all kind of aspects of their own story is very quick to be angry every time Mr. Blanc says, because I've heard it for various times, these people don't know their own history. It's not really true. What? The United States, with wars of choice and 2 million people in prison, and to talk about mental health problems, isn't really in a perspective sometimes or it has to be self-critical about this imperial role that it plays. Because there is, and something that fascinates me, is sort of local anger and rejection and sort of even radical ideas about the meaning of the NGO complex. I won't go in long about sort of the assassination of Jean Anil, but there's also like a very crazy thing happened in October of 2010 in the vicinity of Saint Marc, where the good guys, Médecins Sans Frontières, were setting up an emergency field hospital for the obvious crisis of cholera. But some people in the area, they decided that it was sort of a not in my backyard issue, and they kind of attacked the camp and burned down a few of the tents. That's, I think, for the perspective of any of these organizations, a troubling sort of possible winds of the future if local people have kind of irregular resistance to the presence of NGOs.
Thank you. Question.
Can we get a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But, you know, we actually sat here constantly dialoguing about the comments that were here. And some of them for me are just so shocking. And I think it's to a point where anything can be said about Haitians. And for some reason we can be silenced. We're supposed to suffer. We're poor, we're black, we need help. So we have to listen.
We can't show that we are really wounded. As a student of history, I find it very difficult to hear that Haitians cannot think, they cannot analyze, and they don't have the capacity to govern, and it will take 400 years for that to happen. That is an excuse. It's an excuse for nothing to happen. You know who can't think? Animals. You know what they said about black people after emancipation? We're worried if they're going to be able to control themselves, if they're going to be able to think for themselves, if they're going to be able to write. And what did we do as a black nation? We have a rich intellectual history. And like Jean Casimir said, we were not even supposed to survive. It's absurd that we have to survive. And we have. And the person who said, we need to think about the absurd, no. A lot of absurdities are have already been spoken here. We have always thought about the impossible, and our history has shown that.
Thank you.
And one more thing, one more comment.
Okay.
You know, if you want me to ask a question, yeah, I think every one of you, when you talk about capacity, you need to define capacity. Capacity for what? Like I know me as a graduate student at the University of Chicago right now, I learned a lot a lot in Haiti as a kid. And yes, there was education that I learned there that has helped me today. There's education there, like Du Bois talked about, collective education, education in agriculture, education for patient voodoo, which also transfers history. A lot of education that can be learned, that can be transferred in Haitian education. And you know what? I have taught and sat down to Haitian students at the State University. And I remember coming back to the University of Chicago. I remember sitting there saying, wow, that was one of the most intellectually engaging and analytical discussions I've ever had. Talking about the neoliberal economy, calling the neoliberal economy death, talking about reparation, talking about post-coloniality. What is that? That is thinking. So I know it is. And you know what? And I know you wanted to start me to ask a question, but I refuse to just get up there and ask a question and not be able to talk. Because I think the past should be silenced and the present should be silenced, and that the wounded should be able to speak. But so the main question is that you all always think about this. What is capacity? And how do our discourses about Haiti today related to the past, related to previous discourses? Today, we can't openly say because they're black. Instead, we just have to assume that because they are poor, they can't think. Because they are poor, they're not going to be able to do it. So please, as you talk about Haiti, think about the history and ask yourself the same questions again. Do these have connections? And so can I think about other alternative explanations, which for me the
Thank you.
Any final question? Okay, doesn't seem like there are Twitter questions at this point, so feel free to continue questions into the lunch break, and the next panel is going to be on public health at 2 o'clock. So, you can respond or there's another one.
You don't want to say anything, Michelle?
Ms. Perry, you can comment
Yeah,
on anything.
I would like Michelle to say something because she has a lot to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk, you know. I'm sitting here listening to different point of views about Haiti, and I'm telling myself, where is the real Haiti? In all these discourses that I'm listening to, I don't see where the real Haiti that I'm fighting for, that I know. I don't see it there, except in glimpses of what has been said. So, you know, that's why I didn't want to talk, because you see, Haiti is being studied over and over again, and it seems to me that we still can't get it. So there is a problem. There is a problem. You know, I'm invited to different universities where they're studying Haiti, they're trying to understand these people. We were a country with a very young history. 208 years is just very short. You know. Yet it seems that this country that encompasses all the problems of the world, and even this issue of poverty, to me, is a problem. I think Haitians have been able to subvert this idea of poverty and show to the world that they've been able to survive and live their culture, their history, their way of living, their solidarity, their dignity in poverty. And she's right. In a way, we were not supposed to be. The whole 19th century of this country has been a century where we've been punished every time we tried to do something that came out of the box. Every time we said, all right, this is, and I don't want again to exonerate, you know, those who became emperors, those who became king, those who, you know, spread the little resources that we had. But it is true that today, Haiti is an immense lab being studied from multifaceted ways, and we still can't get it. So there is something about this country that we don't seem to quite understand, and it is deep-rooted in the Haitian people. So there is a different path we should take. Everything that has been said there, you know, even this capacity building, what is the ideology behind it? Where does it come from? I mean, why do we talk about capacity building in the States or in France? Why is it towards Haitians that we turn and say, well, we have to build capacity? What's behind it? And I think Tatiana said that NGOs is business. NGOs is politics. NGOs is politics. You know, there is always in Haiti and towards Haiti some plan linked to geopolitics and the way to control this country. So, I mean, that's why I didn't want to talk.
Thank you for sharing with us what you have shared. But for myself, by working with the local grassroots organizations, I have learned how to build a community. And I can say I can participate in constructing Haiti. And if we need help to do that.
I agree with you, except that we should think. There's been several experiences of building communities. In Haiti, we should always think how reversible things are. Because there is probably something that is missing. I have worked extensively with building communities that were destroyed in one night. Physically, people being arrested, people dying, people sent to jail. So things are reversible, which means that there is something that is missing in our ways of building communities. I'm not saying that to discourage you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to discourage you either, because I think you're doing a fine job. But perhaps there is one element which is fundamental that we have not taken into account yet, which makes things reversible in Haiti.
Do you have any idea what that is?
I don't think I have the answer. I don't have the crystal ball. I'm saying that it is true what this girl said in tears in a way, you know? I mean, I don't think the answer comes from an individual. It's a collective answer. It has to be a collective thinking about the way we should confront this reality. No, I don't have the answer. But I'm saying that for the time, you know, the first development experience was in Haiti. UNESCO, Marbial, 1946. A failure. Why? Why? Everything was there. There was money, there were experts, it was education, it was water sanitation, it was water facilities, it was alphabetization, it was education, school, all the components were there. And money was certainly not an issue at the time. And they went into the most remote rural Haiti, which is today still the most rural. Try to go to Marbial.
There is no road.
Okay, that was 1946. I mean, we have to question ourselves, you know, and I don't think the answer will come from an individual.
Oh, no,
The answer is a collective search to understand why this country that has been studied for so many years is still endemic.
Okay, thank you to all the panelists and everyone's questions and comments. Thank you very much.